The gunshot cracked through the Arizona heat like thunder-splitting stone, and Penelope Kensington watched in horror as the sheriff's bullet found her shoulder instead of the innocent man's rope. It was August 1882 in Nogales, Arizona, a dusty border town where justice moved faster than mercy and questions came after the noose. Penelope had arrived 3 months earlier from Boston, a 22-year-old schoolteacher with ideals as starched as her collar, and a belief that words could change minds. She had learned quickly that the desert sun bleached away such notions, but she had not learned to stay quiet when wrong paraded as right. The man on the gallows was Miguel Vasquez, a Mexican rancher accused of stealing cattle from the powerful Thornton Ranch. Penelope had seen the bill of sale in Miguel's saddlebag when she had delivered books to his daughter. The cattle were legitimate. The hanging was murder dressed in legal clothing, orchestrated by men who wanted Miguel's water rights more than they wanted truth. She had pushed through the crowd of 50 onlookers gathered in the town square, her blue cotton dress collecting dust, her dark blonde hair escaping its pins as she climbed the gallows steps. Sheriff Watts had turned, his face red with whiskey and rage, his hand already on his pistol when she grabbed for the rope. "He is innocent," she had shouted, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I have proof. The cattle were purchased legally and I have the papers to prove it." The sheriff had drawn his gun. The crowd had gasped, and then the world had exploded in pain and noise. Penelope felt herself falling backward, the sky wheeling above her in a perfect arc of blue. Her shoulder burned like someone had pressed a branding iron against her flesh. She could not breathe. She could not think. The ground rushed up to meet her, and she knew she was going to die in the dirt of this God-forsaken town, just another fool who thought justice mattered. But the ground never came. Instead, strong arms caught her mid-fall, arms that smelled of leather and horse and sage. She found herself looking up into a face carved from sun and wind, all hard angles and concerned gray eyes beneath the shadow of a black hat. "I have got you," a deep voice said, and there was something in those words that made her believe him despite the fire spreading through her shoulder and down her arm. Ryder Yates had been standing at the back of the crowd, watching the hanging with the same sick feeling he got every time frontier justice dispensed with the actual justice part. He was 26 years old, a cattle driver who had spent the last 8 years moving herds from Texas to Kansas, and everywhere in between. He had seen enough lynch mobs to recognize one, and he had been trying to decide whether intervening would get him killed when the blonde schoolteacher had beaten him to it. He had started moving the moment the sheriff's hand went to his gun, but he had not been fast enough to prevent the shot. He had only been fast enough to catch her fall. Now he held her in his arms, feeling the warm blood seeping through her dress onto his calloused hands, and something fierce and protective surged through his chest. Her eyes were the color of creek water, green and brown mixed together, and they were clouded with pain and shock. "The papers," she whispered, her good hand clutching at his shirt. "In my pocket. Stop the hanging." Ryder looked up at the gallows where Miguel Vasquez still stood with the noose around his neck, eyes wide with terror. He looked at Sheriff Watts, who had gone pale at the sight of blood. He looked at the crowd, which had erupted into shouts and arguments. "Someone stop this hanging." Ryder roared, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "And someone get those damned papers from her pocket." Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store, pushed through the crowd and carefully extracted a folded envelope from Penelope's dress pocket. She climbed the gallows steps with more courage than most of the men present and shoved the papers into Sheriff Watts's face. "Read them," she demanded. "You shot an innocent woman. The least you can do is read the proof she near died to show you. Ryder did not wait to see what happened next. Penelope's face had gone from pale to gray, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. He knew shock when he saw it, and he knew she was bleeding badly. "Where is the doctor?" he shouted. "Doc Henderson is 20 miles north in Tubac," someone called back. "He went there yesterday for a difficult birth." 20 miles. It might as well have been 100 if she bled out in the next hour. "Is there anyone else?" Ryder demanded, already turning toward where his horse stood tied at the hitching post. "Old man Garrett worked as a field surgeon in the war," another voice offered. "But he lives 5 miles east, and he is half blind and mostly drunk." "Then I am riding for Doc Henderson," Ryder said flatly. He looked down at Penelope, whose eyes were starting to flutter closed. "Stay with me. Do you hear? Stay awake and stay alive." "Cold," she whispered. "So cold." It was 95 degrees in the shade, but Ryder knew shock was stealing her body heat. He strode to his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Copper, and somehow managed to mount while still holding Penelope. He settled her across his lap, cradling her against his chest with one arm while his other hand took the reins. "Someone ride ahead and tell Doc Henderson I am coming," he called out. "And if that man hangs before this is sorted out, I will come back and there will be hell to pay." He did not wait for a response. He dug his heels into Copper's sides, and the mare leaped forward, sensing the urgency in her rider's body. The town blurred past them, adobe buildings and startled faces, and then they were out on the open road heading north through the scrubland. The trail to Tubac was rough, cutting through mesquite and creosote bush, climbing into rocky hills where rattlesnakes sunned themselves on warm stones. Ryder pushed Copper as hard as he dared, keeping one eye on the trail and the other on the woman in his arms. He had fashioned a rough bandage from his neckerchief, pressing it against the wound on her shoulder, but blood still seeped through the fabric. "Tell me your name," he said, partly to keep her conscious and partly because he needed to know. If she died in his arms, he wanted to at least know who she had been. "Penelope," she breathed. "Penelope Kensington." "That is a fancy name for a woman brave enough to climb a gallows," he said, trying to keep his tone light even though fear clutched at his throat. "Where are you from, Penelope Kensington?" "Boston." Her head lolled against his shoulder. "Came here to teach, stupid." "Not stupid," Ryder said fiercely. "Brave, foolish maybe, but brave. That man would be dead right now if not for you. Might still die, might die myself." "No," Ryder said, and he was surprised by the force in his voice. "You are not dying today. I will not allow it." She made a sound that might have been a laugh if she had the strength for it. "Do not think you get a say." "I am the one holding you, so I reckon I get a say," he countered. "Now tell me about Boston. Tell me why you left a comfortable life to come teach in a place like Nogales." He kept her talking for the next hour, pulling words out of her even when she wanted to slip into silence. She told him about her father, a minister who had died of pneumonia 2 years earlier. She told him about her mother, who had remarried a banker Penelope could not stand. She told him about wanting to make a difference, about believing that education could bridge the divide between cultures, about the Mexican children in Nogales who were hungry for learning but had no one to teach them English. In return, he told her about growing up on a failing ranch in West Texas, about his father drinking himself to death after his mother died of cholera, about taking to the cattle trails because moving felt safer than staying still. He told her things he had never told anyone, words pulled from him by the intimacy of crisis and the feel of her in his arms. Copper was lathered with sweat and breathing hard when they finally rode into Tubac. It was smaller than Nogales, just a handful of buildings clustered around an old Spanish mission. Ryder pulled up in front of a whitewashed adobe house with a shingle out front that read, Dr. Samuel Henderson, Physician. He was off the horse before Copper had fully stopped, carrying Penelope toward the door. It opened before he could knock, and a wiry man with gray hair and wire-rimmed spectacles looked out. Ryder came ahead and told me, Doc Henderson said without preamble. Bring her in quickly. How long ago was she shot? About an hour and a half, Ryder said, following the doctor into a clean, sparse room that smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. She has been drifting in and out. Put her on the table. Carefully now. Ryder laid Penelope on the examination table with a gentleness that surprised him. Her eyes opened briefly, finding his face. Thank you, she whispered. Ryder. The fact that she remembered his name made something warm bloom in his chest. You just hold on. The doctor is going to fix you up. Doc Henderson was already cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of her dress, exposing the wound. He probed it with practiced fingers while Penelope gasped in pain. Bullet went through clean, he announced. Missed the bone, missed the lung. She is very lucky. But she has lost a lot of blood and there is always risk of infection. I need to clean the wound, stitch her up, and then we wait and see. What can I do? Ryder asked. Hold her hands. Talk to her. This is going to hurt and I need her to stay as still as possible. Ryder moved to the head of the table and took Penelope's hand in both of his. Her fingers were cold despite the heat, and they gripped his with desperate strength. Look at me, he said softly, bending so his face filled her vision. Just keep looking at me. Think about Boston. Think about those children you teach. Think about anything except what the doctor is doing. Her eyes locked on his, and he watched them widen with pain as Doc Henderson began to clean the wound. She did not scream, but a thin, terrible sound escaped her throat. Tears tracked down her temples into her hair. Her nails dug into Ryder's hands hard enough to draw blood. You are doing so well, Ryder murmured. So brave. Just a little longer now. Doc Henderson worked with swift efficiency, irrigating the wound with boiled water and carbolic solution, then threading a curved needle with catgut. The stitching seemed to take forever, each pass of the needle making Penelope's body go rigid with pain. Finally, mercifully, it was done. Doc Henderson wrapped her shoulder in clean bandages and stepped back, wiping his bloody hands on a cloth. She needs rest, fluids, and close watching for the next few days, he said. Fever is the main danger now. If infection sets in, she will spike a temperature within 24 hours. After that, it is God's will and good nursing. I will nurse her, Ryder heard himself say. Doc Henderson raised an eyebrow. You her husband? No, sir. Her brother, cousin, any relation at all? No, sir, Ryder repeated. But I am the one who brought her here, and I am not leaving until I know she is going to be fine. The doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I have a spare room in back. You can bed down there while she uses the sick room here, but I expect proper behavior under my roof. Yes, sir. Penelope had slipped into unconsciousness during the final stitches, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion and trauma. Ryder stood looking down at her, at the dark lashes against her pale cheeks, at the fragile rise and fall of her chest. 24 hours ago, he had not known she existed. Now the thought of losing her made his chest ache. The next 3 days existed in a strange, suspended space outside normal time. Penelope developed a fever the first night, as Doc Henderson had warned she might. Ryder sat by her bedside, changing the cool cloths on her forehead, spooning water between her cracked lips, listening to her delirious murmurs. She called for her father. She recited lessons to invisible students. She cried out in protest against injustice only she could see. On the second day, her fever broke. She woke briefly, confused about where she was, and Ryder explained gently about the doctor, about Tubac, about the long ride north. She drank some broth and fell back asleep. But this time, it was natural sleep rather than the restless fever-tossed unconsciousness of before. By the third day, she was sitting up against pillows, color returning to her cheeks, arguing with Doc Henderson about whether she was well enough to eat solid food. "The woman is stubborn as a mule," Doc Henderson said to Ryder with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Which is probably why she survived at all," Ryder grinned. "I noticed that about her." It was late afternoon when he finally sat down next to her bed for something other than nursing duties. Penelope looked at him with clear eyes, really seeing him for perhaps the first time since the shooting. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "Twice. Once by catching me and once by riding for the doctor." "You saved a man's life first," Ryder pointed out. "What happened to Miguel Vasquez, anyway?" As if in answer, there was a knock at Doc Henderson's door. When the doctor opened it, a young Mexican woman stood there holding a basket covered with a cloth. She was pretty, with worried dark eyes, and she asked in accented English if this was where Penelope Kensington was staying. "I am Maria Vasquez," she explained when Doc Henderson brought her in. "My father, Miguel, he is alive because of Miss Kensington. The papers she had, they proved his innocence. The sheriff, he stopped the hanging. My father, he is home with my mother now, safe." She held out the basket to Penelope, tears streaming down her face. "My mother sent food. We do not have much, but we wanted you to know what you did for us. You are a hero." Penelope took the basket with her good hand, her own eyes filling. "I am just grateful your father is safe. How is everything in Nogales?" "There is much anger at Sheriff Watts," Maria said. "People are saying he should be charged for shooting you. But the Thornton Ranch, they have much power. I think nothing will happen to him. I am sorry." After Maria left, Penelope was quiet for a long time, staring at the basket of food in her lap. "You are thinking about going back," Ryder said. It was not a question. Those children need a teacher, and someone needs to stand up to men like Sheriff Watts and the Thorntons. "Someone nearly got killed doing exactly that," Ryder pointed out, his voice sharper than he intended. "What happens next time? You might not be so lucky. So I should just do nothing. Let injustice happen because fighting it is dangerous." "I am not saying that." "Then what are you saying?" Ryder ran a hand through his hair, frustrated because he could not fully articulate the tangle of feelings in his chest. Fear for her safety. Admiration for her courage. Something deeper and more complicated that had grown during the days and nights of watching over her. "I am saying that maybe you do not have to fight alone," he said finally. "I am saying that maybe some of us have been wandering too long and it is time to stand still for a while, in a place that matters, with people who matter." Penelope looked at him searchingly. "What are you talking about, Ryder?" He met her eyes, those creek water eyes that had haunted his dreams, and took a chance. "I am talking about staying in Nogales, getting a job at one of the ranches, or maybe even starting my own small spread. I have saved up some money from the cattle drives. I am talking about being someone who stands with you when you stand up for what is right. If you will have me standing there, that is. You would do that." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You would give up the trail." "I have been looking for a reason to stop moving for years," Ryder admitted. "I just had not found it until I caught a stubborn schoolteacher falling off a gallows." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth despite the seriousness of the moment. "That is a terrible basis for a life decision." "Maybe. Or maybe it is the best basis I have ever had." He reached out and carefully took her hand, mindful of her injuries. "I am not asking for promises or anything you are not ready to give. I am just asking if you would mind having a friend around, someone who has your back when you need it." Someone who thinks you are the bravest person he has ever met. Penelope's fingers tightened around his. I would like that very much. But Ryder, you need to understand something about me. I cannot stop fighting when I see wrong. It is who I am. If you stay, there will likely be more trouble. More danger. Then we will face it together, Ryder said simply. That is what partners do. Partners, she repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. Doc Henderson released Penelope a week after the shooting, with strict instructions to rest, change her bandages daily, and avoid any strenuous activity for at least a month. Ryder had sent word to Nogales about her recovery, and when they rode back into town together, they were greeted as heroes. The Mexican community in particular turned out to welcome Penelope home. There were flowers, food, and enough gratitude to make her blush and deflect. Miguel Vasquez himself came to thank her, his wife and 5 children clustered around him. You gave me back my life, he said, gripping her good hand in both of his. If there is ever anything you need, anything at all, you come to me. I am in your debt forever. Just love your family and be a good man, Penelope said gently. That is all the thanks I need. Ryder, meanwhile, made inquiries around town about work. To his surprise, Miguel Vasquez offered him a job as foreman on his ranch. The pay was modest but fair, and it came with a small house on the property. Miss Kensington saved my life, Miguel explained, and you saved hers. It would be an honor to have you working my land. Besides, I think it would be good to have someone around who is not afraid to stand up to the Thorntons if they make trouble again. Ryder accepted, and within 2 weeks he had moved into the foreman's house, a 2-room adobe structure with a covered porch and a view of the distant mountains. It was not much, but it was the first real home he had had since he was 18 years old. He and Penelope fell into an easy rhythm. He would work the ranch during the day, mending fences and managing the small crew of vaqueros Miguel employed. She would teach her students in the schoolhouse, a labor of love that paid little but meant everything to her. In the evenings, they would sit on his porch and talk about everything and nothing, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. It was during one of those evenings, about 6 weeks after the shooting, that Ryder finally worked up the courage to address what had been building between them. I am falling in love with you, he said abruptly, the words tumbling out without any of the eloquence he had planned. I know it is probably too soon and maybe you do not feel the same way, but I needed to say it. I am falling in love with you, Penelope Kensington, and I do not know what to do about it. Penelope had been sipping coffee from a tin cup, and she nearly choked. When she recovered, she set the cup down carefully and turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. Too soon, she repeated. Ryder, you held me while I bled and rode 20 miles to save my life. You sat by my bedside for 3 days. You gave up your entire way of living to stay in a dusty border town because I was going to be here. If that is not love already, I do not know what is. So you feel it too. His heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. I have felt it since I woke up in Doc Henderson's office and saw your face, she admitted. I thought I was being ridiculous. We barely knew each other. But Ryder, in the ways that matter, I feel like I have known you forever. You are good and brave and kind, and you make me feel safe in a world that has felt dangerous since my father died. Ryder reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. I am not good with words. I have spent too many years talking to horses and cattle. But I promise you this, I will stand by you for as long as you will have me. I will support your teaching and your fighting for justice, even when it scares me. I will be the partner you deserve. And I promise to try not to get shot again, Penelope said with a watery laugh. Because I discovered I very much want to stick around and see where this goes. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not want. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of coffee and promise, gentle because of her still healing shoulder, but full of all the feeling they had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, Penelope rested her forehead against his. "I love you, Ryder Yates. I think I have loved you since you caught me falling." "I love you too," he murmured. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never fall without me there to catch you." The months that followed were not without challenges. Sheriff Watts remained in his position despite public outcry, protected by the Thornton family's influence. There were still injustices in Nogales, still moments when Penelope had to bite her tongue or pick her battles carefully. But she did not fight alone. Ryder was there, steady and strong, a quiet presence that gave her courage. The Mexican community embraced them both. Penelope's school grew as word spread that she treated all her students with equal respect and dignity, regardless of their background. She taught English and arithmetic, but also Spanish to the Anglo children, believing that understanding went both ways. Ryder proved himself as capable with ranch management as he had been with cattle driving. Under his supervision, Miguel's ranch prospered. He was fair with the workers, generous with praise, and quick to solve problems before they escalated. He earned respect the old-fashioned way through competence and character. In December of 1882, as winter brought cool nights to the desert, Ryder proposed. There was nothing fancy about it. They were on his porch again, wrapped in a blanket against the chill, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Marry me," he said, the words simple and direct. "I know I am just a ranch foreman without much to offer. But I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend every day of the rest of my life by your side." Penelope turned in his arms, her eyes bright with tears. "You are not just anything. You are everything. And yes, I will marry you, tomorrow if you want." "Tomorrow might be rushing it," he said with a grin. "But soon, as soon as we can arrange it." They were married on a bright day in January 1883 in the little church in Nogales with half the town in attendance. Penelope wore a simple cream-colored dress that the women of the community had helped sew, and she carried wildflowers that bloomed improbably in the winter desert. Ryder wore his best clothes, which were not fancy but were clean and pressed, and he had never looked more handsome to her. Miguel Vasquez gave Penelope away, a gesture that meant everything to both of them. Doc Henderson stood as Ryder's best man. Maria Vasquez and several of Penelope's students served as attendants, their faces shining with joy. When the priest asked Ryder if he would take Penelope as his wife, his voice rang out clear and strong, "I will." And when Penelope was asked the same question, she looked into Ryder's gray eyes and said with absolute certainty, "I will." The kiss that sealed their marriage was met with cheers and applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Penelope felt a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. This was where she was meant to be. This man was who she was meant to be with. The reception was held at Miguel's ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Penelope's shoulder had healed, leaving only a small scar that she wore as a badge of honor. She danced with her husband under the stars, his arms strong around her, and felt grateful for every moment that had led to this one. "Happy," Ryder murmured into her hair. "Impossibly happy," she confirmed. "You, more than I ever thought I could be." They moved into the foreman's house together, making it a home with small touches. Penelope's books lined shelves Ryder built. Curtains she sewed hung in the windows. A marriage bed replaced Ryder's narrow cot. It was modest by Boston standards, but to both of them it was paradise. Their first year of marriage was a time of adjustment and discovery. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's moods, each other's needs. They had disagreements, as all couples do, but they worked through them with honesty and respect. Ryder learned when to push and when to let Penelope work through her feelings on her own. Penelope learned to accept help, to lean on her husband instead of insisting on carrying every burden alone. In the spring of 1884, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They were going to be parents. They were going to bring a child into a world that could be harsh and dangerous, but also beautiful and full of possibility. What if I am not a good father? Ryder confessed one night, his hand resting on Penelope's still flat stomach. I did not exactly have a good example to follow. You will be wonderful, Penelope assured him. You are patient and kind and strong. Our child will be lucky to have you. Our child will be lucky to have you, he countered. You are going to teach them to be brave and to fight for what is right. We will teach them together, she said firmly. Everything together. Their son was born in November 1884, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas, after Penelope's father, and from the moment Ryder held him, any doubts about fatherhood evaporated. He is perfect, Ryder whispered, staring down at the tiny face. Penelope, we made a perfect person. We did, she agreed, exhausted but elated. We really did. Thomas was a happy baby who grew into a curious toddler. He learned to walk in the dusty yard of the foreman's house, taking his first steps toward his father's outstretched arms. He learned to talk sitting on his mother's lap while she graded papers, absorbing language like a sponge. In 1887, they had a daughter they named Sarah. She had her mother's green-brown eyes and her father's quiet strength. Where Thomas was all energy and questions, Sarah was thoughtful and observant, content to sit and watch the world around her. Miguel Vasquez, now in his 50s, began talking about retiring. He approached Ryder with a proposition. He would sell him half the ranch at a price Ryder could manage over time. It would make Ryder a partner rather than just an employee, with a real stake in the land and its future. I trust you, Miguel said simply. You have been like a son to me. I want to see this land in good hands when I am gone, and yours are the best hands I know. Ryder accepted with gratitude, and suddenly the future looked even brighter. He was no longer just a drifting cowboy. He was a rancher, a husband, a father. He had roots that went deep into the desert soil. Penelope continued teaching, even with 2 young children. The community rallied around her, helping with childcare so she could keep the schoolhouse open. She was making a real difference, one student at a time, one lesson at a time. And when injustice reared its head, as it inevitably did in a place like Nogales, she still fought it, but now with Ryder and others at her side. Sheriff Watts eventually lost his position, not through any dramatic confrontation but through simple democracy. Enough people had had enough of his corruption and violence, and they voted him out in favor of a younger man with a reputation for fairness. Watts left Nogales bitter and broke, and few mourned his departure. The Thornton Ranch faced its own reckoning when the patriarch died, and his sons proved less skilled at maintaining the empire he had built through intimidation and sharp dealing. Piece by piece, the ranch was sold off, including portions that Miguel and Ryder were able to purchase, expanding their own operation. By 1890, Ryder and Penelope had built something remarkable. The ranch was thriving. The school had expanded to include a second teacher. Their children were healthy and happy. The community they were part of, while still imperfect, was more just than it had been the day Penelope climbed those gallows steps. On a warm evening in August, Exactly 8 years after the shooting, they sat on their porch together. The children were asleep inside. The desert stretched out before them, painted in sunset colors. "You ever miss Boston?" Ryder asked. It was a question he had never asked before, afraid of the answer. Penelope considered it seriously, as she considered all his questions. "I miss my father," she said finally. "But Boston itself? No, my life is here. My heart is here. Everything that matters to me is right here in this place. Even though it is dusty and hot and nothing like the life you were raised for. Especially because of that," she said, taking his hand. "I was raised to be decorative and quiet, to marry well and cause no trouble. But I was meant to teach and fight and love a good man who catches me when I fall. This life, this difficult, beautiful life we have built together, is exactly what I was meant for." Ryder pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I was just wandering before I met you, going from place to place without purpose. You gave me a reason to stop, a reason to build instead of just pass through." "We gave each other reasons," Penelope corrected softly. "That is what love does." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, like diamonds scattered across dark velvet. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas talking in his sleep, some dream adventure playing out in his young mind. Sarah would be curled up with her favorite rag doll, peaceful and content. "I am happy," Ryder said, a note of wonder in his voice. "After all the years of just existing, just surviving, I am truly happy." "So am I," Penelope said. "So am I." The years continued to unfold, bringing both challenges and joys as years always do. In 1892, they had another daughter, Elizabeth, who came into the world during a rare winter storm that dumped 3 inches of rain on the parched desert. She was a firecracker from the start, all personality and opinions. Thomas grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He had a gift with horses, able to gentle even the wildest Mustang with patience and kindness. Sarah showed her mother's passion for learning and her father's quiet determination. Elizabeth, true to her dramatic entrance, approached life with enthusiasm and a complete lack of fear that both terrified and delighted her parents. The school continued to thrive under Penelope's guidance. Students who had once been taught by her were now bringing their own children to learn. The barrier between the Anglo and Mexican communities, while not eliminated, had softened significantly. People worked together, celebrated together, grieved together. Ryder and Miguel expanded the ranch until it was one of the most successful operations in southern Arizona. They treated their workers fairly, paid them well, and created a reputation for integrity that stood in stark contrast to the way the Thornton Ranch had operated. Success built on honesty, it turned out, was more satisfying and more sustainable than success built on exploitation. In 1898, when Thomas was 14, he asked his father about the day his parents had met. Ryder had told the story before, but always in simplified terms suitable for young ears. Now, sitting on the porch on a quiet evening, he told it fully. "Your mother was the bravest person I had ever seen," Ryder said, looking out at the desert he had come to love. "She saw an innocent man about to die and she did not care about her own safety. She just knew she had to try to stop it. When the sheriff shot her, when I caught her falling, I knew in that moment that my life had just changed forever. I did not know how yet, but I knew nothing would ever be the same." "Were you scared?" Thomas asked. "When you were riding for the doctor?" "Terrified," Ryder admitted. "More scared than I had ever been. I had known your mother for maybe 10 minutes, but the thought of losing her was unbearable. I pushed copper harder than I should have, risked both our necks on that rough trail, because I could not imagine a world where Penelope Kensington did not exist." "That is so romantic," Sarah sighed from the doorway, where she and her sisters had been eavesdropping. Penelope laughed, appearing behind their daughters. It was also bloody and painful and terrifying. Romance in real life is not all poetry and roses. Sometimes it is holding someone's hand while they are stitched up without morphine. Sometimes it is sitting by someone's sick, changing fever cloths. Sometimes it is choosing to stay in a place and build a life when you could have just kept drifting. But it is worth it, Ryder said, reaching for her hand, still after all these years needing that physical connection. Every moment of fear, every moment of difficulty, it is all worth it for this. For you, for our children, for the life we have built. Always worth it, Penelope agreed, squeezing his hand. As the new century approached, Ryder and Penelope looked back on nearly 2 decades of marriage with satisfaction and forward to the future with hope. They had weathered droughts and economic downturns. They had buried friends and celebrated births. They had fought injustice where they could and made peace with what they could not change. They had raised 3 children who were growing into good, thoughtful people. The ranch was now fully theirs, Miguel having passed peacefully in his sleep in 1897, surrounded by family. He had lived to see his grandchildren grow, to see the land he loved prosper under Ryder's management. In his will, he had left his remaining share of the ranch to Ryder and Penelope, along with a letter expressing his gratitude for all they had done for him and his family. "You saved my life twice," the letter read. "Once when Miss Kensington stopped my hanging, and again when you both showed me that goodness still exists in this hard world. Care for this land as you have cared for each other, with love and respect and determination, and it will provide for your children and your children's children." They had framed the letter and hung it in their home, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. On the evening of August 15th, 1900, exactly 18 years after the shooting, Ryder and Penelope sat on their porch once again. Their children were grown or growing healthy and happy. The ranch was prosperous. The school was thriving. The community was at peace. 18 years, Penelope mused, her head on Ryder's shoulder. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Would you change anything? Ryder asked. If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you still climb those gallows steps? Penelope was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. The pain was real, she said finally. The fear was real. I genuinely thought I was going to die, but would I change it? No. Because that moment led to you catching me. It led to the ride to Tubac and the nights you sat by my bedside. It led to everything we have built together. I would not trade this life for anything, which means I would not change the moment that made it possible. Even though you got shot. Even though I got shot, she confirmed. Though I still do not recommend it as a way to meet one's future husband. Ryder laughed, the sound deep and genuine. No, there are probably easier ways, but I do not think any of them would have bound us together quite the same way. We were forged in crisis, Penelope agreed, and we have been strong ever since. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they loved, the land they had built a life on. Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential. The sound was music, the soundtrack of a life well lived. "I love you," Ryder said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he said them, as they would be until his last breath. "I will always love you." "And I will always love you," Penelope replied, turning to kiss him, still after all these years feeling that spark of connection that had ignited the moment he caught her fall. "My partner, my love, my home." As the stars emerged one by one above them, Ryder and Penelope Yates sat together in the gathering darkness, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in sync. They had started with a moment of violence and crisis, with blood and bullets and a desperate ride through the desert. But they had built something beautiful from that harsh beginning. A love that had weathered every storm, a family that filled their hearts, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The gallows where they met had long since been torn down, replaced by a small park where children played. The old courthouse had been renovated. Nogales had grown and changed, becoming more civilized, though it retained its essential character as a border town where cultures met and mingled. But some things remained constant. The desert still stretched wide and wild. The mountains still stood purple in the distance. And in a comfortable adobe house on a thriving ranch, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances continued to build their life together, day by day, year by year, choice by choice. Thomas eventually took over management of the ranch, proving himself as capable as his father. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, opening a school in a nearby town. Elizabeth surprised everyone by studying law, determined to fight injustice in the courtroom the way her mother had fought it in the streets. Ryder and Penelope, growing older but no less devoted to each other, watched their children flourish with pride. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading wide and strong. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Over 100 people attended, testament to the lives Ryder and Penelope had touched over the decades. There were former students, ranch workers past and present, members of the community from every background and walk of life. Miguel's daughter Maria, now a grandmother herself, stood to give a toast. 30 years ago, Penelope Yates, then Kensington, saved my father's life at the risk of her own. She climbed those gallows steps knowing she might die, but she climbed them anyway because she could not stand by and watch an innocent man hang. And Ryder Yates, who had never met her before that moment, caught her when she fell and rode like the devil himself was chasing him to save her life. Their love story began with courage and sacrifice, and it has continued in that same spirit ever since. They have made this community better, this land more prosperous, and this world more just. We are all blessed to know them. The crowd erupted in applause and agreement. Ryder and Penelope, standing side by side as they had for 3 decades, felt overwhelmed by the love and respect surrounding them. When it was Ryder's turn to speak, he kept it simple, as was his way. I was just a drifter before I met Penelope. I had no roots, no purpose, no real reason for being. She gave me all of that. She gave me a home, a family, a reason to be better than I was. Everything good in my life comes from the moment I decided to catch her instead of letting her fall. It was the easiest and the best decision I ever made. Penelope wiped tears from her eyes as she added, and Ryder gave me the courage to keep fighting for what is right, knowing I would not have to fight alone. He gave me partnership and love and a family I treasure more than words can express. We have built something beautiful together, and I am grateful for every single day. As the celebration continued around them, as their children and grandchildren laughed and danced and told stories, Ryder and Penelope slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. The desert night was cool and clear, the sky ablaze with stars. 30 years, Ryder marveled. It has gone so fast. And so slow, Penelope added. We have lived lifetimes together. Do you think about it still? He asked. That day. Sometimes, she admitted. I still dream about it occasionally. The sound of the gunshot, the feeling of falling, and then your arms catching me and knowing somehow that I was going to be all right. I dream about it too, Ryder confessed. I dream about what would have happened if I had not been there that day. If I had ridden through Nogales a day earlier or a day later, If I had not been standing in that crowd, all the moments of chance that had to align perfectly for us to find each other. I do not believe it was chance, Penelope said softly. I believe we were meant to find each other. Maybe not in that exact way, but somehow, someone we would have met. Because what we have, Ryder, it is too strong to be accident. It is destiny. Ryder smiled, pulling her close. You are getting philosophical in your old age. We are the same age, she pointed out with a laugh. And I have always been philosophical. You are just now noticing. I notice everything about you, he murmured. I always have. They stood together in the starlight, two souls who had found each other against all odds and had built something extraordinary from a moment of crisis and courage. Behind them, the house glowed with light and life, filled with the family they had created. Before them, the desert stretched infinite and eternal, witness to their love. Years continued to pass, bringing the changes and challenges that time always brings. Ryder's hair went completely gray, then white. Penelope developed arthritis that made writing difficult, forcing her to finally retire from teaching at age 60. They slowed down, as people do, but their love remained as strong as ever. They celebrated their 40th anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their immediate family. 40 years of marriage, of partnership, of love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. On their 50th anniversary in 1933, Nogales threw them a celebration that rivaled their 30th. They were now legends in the community, the couple whose love story had become the stuff of local folklore. The schoolteacher who had been shot trying to stop a hanging. The cowboy who had caught her fall and ridden hard for the doctor. The partnership that had transformed a community. Ryder was 77 years old now, Penelope 73. They moved more slowly, their bodies bearing the marks of 7 decades of life. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, the brave woman on the gallows and the cowboy with the quick reflexes and the quicker heart. 50 years, Penelope said wonderingly. Half a century. Best 50 years of my life, Ryder said. Every single day of them. Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones, we faced them together. They were surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a family tree that had grown vast and strong from the roots they had planted. Thomas and his wife had given them 5 grandchildren. Sarah and her husband had 4. Elizabeth, true to her independent nature, had married late but happily, and had 2 children who showed every sign of inheriting her fire. The great-grandchildren were still young, but they listened wide-eyed to stories of their great-grandparents' courtship, of gallows and gunshots and desperate rides through the desert. Ryder and Penelope lived to see the world change in ways they never could have imagined. Automobiles replaced horses. Electricity came to even rural Arizona. The territorial wildness they had known gave way to statehood and civilization. The Old West faded into memory and myth, but their love remained constant through it all, an anchor in a changing world. Ryder passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1936, at the age of 80. He was surrounded by family, including Penelope, who held his hand as his breathing slowed and finally stopped. His last words were her name, spoken with all the love and devotion of 53 years of marriage. Penelope grieved deeply, but without despair. She had been blessed with more than half a century with the man she loved. They had built an extraordinary life together. She could not regret a moment of it, even now at the end. She lived another 3 years, spending her final time surrounded by the family they had created. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about the old days, about justice and courage and love that conquered all obstacles. She made sure they understood that their heritage was built on bravery and principle, on standing up for what was right even when it was dangerous. When Penelope died in 1939 at the age of 79, the entire community mourned. She was buried next to Ryder on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the vast Arizona sky they had both loved. On her tombstone, beneath her name and dates, was inscribed a simple epitaph chosen by her children. She climbed the gallows to save a life. He caught her when she fell. Together, they built a legacy of love and justice. The story of Ryder Yates and Penelope Kensington became part of Nogales history, told and retold over the decades that followed. The house where they lived was preserved, eventually becoming a small museum dedicated to their lives and the early days of the territory. The school where Penelope taught was named in her honor. A scholarship was established in Ryder's name for young people pursuing careers in ranching or agriculture. Their descendants continued the traditions they had established, carrying forward values of justice, courage, and love. The ranch remained in family hands, generation after generation, a testament to what could be built when people worked together with integrity and vision. And on August 15th of every year, members of the Yates family would gather on that hill where Ryder and Penelope were buried. They would tell the story again of the schoolteacher and the cowboy, of the gunshot and the gallows and the desperate ride to save a life. They would remember that love could bloom even from violence and crisis, that courage came in many forms, and that the best legacy anyone could leave was a life lived with principle and passion. The desert wind would blow across the graves, carrying with it the scent of sage and creosote. The mountains would stand purple in the distance, and if you listened very carefully, you might almost hear the echo of hoofbeats, a cowboy riding hard through the Arizona heat, carrying precious cargo, racing against time and death itself for love. That was how it began, with a fall and a catch, with blood and bullets and a 20-mile ride. And that was how it endured, in memory and legacy, in the family they created, and the community they helped build, in the story that proved love could conquer even the hardest circumstances the Wild West could throw at two brave souls who refused to give up on justice or each other.